Welcome to the Startup Help Desk. We're your source for answers to questions about starting companies, building companies, and the meaning of life. We have a panel of investors, founders, and experts to answer questions submitted by people just like you about how to build your business and share our lessons from our vast experience at making mistakes, which we have very many of. My name is Sean Burns. I've been a founder for about 20 years of companies like Flurry and Outlier. These days, I work in venture investing at a firm called Near Horizon that I started last year. And I'm glad to be joined, as always, by Ash and Nick.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ash Rust, and I'm a pre-seed investor based in San Francisco. I mostly invest in B2B companies based in the US and UK at the idea stage through my fund, Sterling Road. I've also worked at places like Trinity Ventures and Bullpen Capital as an advisor. Before investing, I was an entrepreneur myself, most notably an early employee at the social media analysis company Clout, as well as the co-founder and CEO of SendHub. These days, I spend most of my time coaching founders, and I've helped more than 1,500 startups over the years.
Hey, this is Nick Melionis. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Navi. Our tools and services help people and organizations start and succeed on their innovation quests. I've supported hundreds of innovators and startups along the way, and I'm hyped to hop into today's questions.
And all of today's questions today are about giving up. And no, we're not giving up on you or answering your questions or anything like that, but it comes up a lot when you're building a new company is, should you keep going or should you give up? And we'll dive into questions all about that today. But before we do that, remember, all the questions we answer here on the Help Desk are submitted by people like you. So if you have questions, we would love to answer them. Head over to thestartuphelpdesk.com or find us on X/Twitter at thestartuphd. Submit your questions and you'll hear them in a future episode. But for now, let's talk about giving up. And our first question, Ash and Nick, is submitted by a founder. It says, we have an aggressive goal this quarter, but 1 month into the quarter, it's clear we won't reach it. Should we keep pursuing it, or should we change the goal mid-quarter? I have lots of opinions on this. Ash, what do you think, man?
Yeah, first of all, your goals weren't written in the Old Testament, so they are made to be adjusted. It's not a problem at all. You shouldn't expect to be any good, really, at setting these goals, especially early on. And so take that with a grain of salt. They're made to be adjusted. Do not leave it. That is going to be demotivating for the team as they are looking at a goal that they know they can't hit. So you change it, usually obviously down, to still be challenging, but yet achievable. And then it's fine to have a retrospective or a similar meeting where you analyze what went wrong. Was it the inputs? Was it the outputs? Did someone who was responsible for something not come through? And then we can try and resolve those issues ASAP and hit this, challenging but achievable new goal.
Yeah, I like that, Ash. And I think the one balancing thought I've got about this to run counter to that is the one challenge you want to avoid.
Nick, don't sugarcoat it. If you're going to disagree with Ash, you just own it, you jump in.
And maybe don't take Sean's advice on disagreeing with me. Just
That's a good point,
yeah. Just based on performance.
Let me see how I can stick the landing on that. Well, ultimately, though, I think there's a lot of gems from this. The thing I want to emphasize here is it's more important to pursue relevant goals than ambitious goals. And so, of course, if adjusting the goal makes sense based off of what's relevant for the business, go for it. The challenge is you don't want to build a culture of regularly revising goals that are always revised downwards, but still roughly within that same domain. And so I would say that if there are opportunities where you are going to exceed a goal, then also build the muscle of extending that goal to be even more ambitious. Try to avoid this case of always downsizing your goal just so you never miss a goal. If you do miss goals on occasion, then great. That's a huge learning opportunity, and use that as a way to really reflect on that and recognize that you came up short. But that doesn't mean for the next one, you can't succeed in pursuing it.
That seems like a really important line, though, between what you both said, which is in one case, you don't want people to pursue hopeless goals. But at the same time, if you change the goal too often, then goals are meaningless because people will just wait for the next goal to get reset. Where is that line, do you guys think? Like, how do you know if you've gone too far in one direction or the other?
Well, if you're not really making the kind of progress that's going to matter for the business, i.e. that, minimum requirement for a venture round or on the path to profitability, then you know that you're adjusting the goals down too much, right? There has to be a minimum level of urgency where the plan to reach the either profitability or fundraising goal is realistic and achievable. And so, if your team is not performing within those bounds, then it's probably time to make some changes.
And part of it's probably a function of, all right, this is the first quarter of goal planning. Likely your goals are going to be, in a lot of ways, wildly inaccurate. But then when you get to the next quarter and the next, at some point, you want to have some consistency in terms of hitting them. And if you're not seeing that, then it's a sign of a broader challenge.
Yeah, I can tell you from my experience, if you have a sales team, if you ever start to adjust the sales goal in the middle of the quarter, your sales team will learn it's easier to sell you and try to convince you to change the sales goal than to go out there and sell the product. And so you have to be really careful about the signals that you set. At the same time, to Ash's point, if your sales goals are always so high that sales team is not going to achieve them, then they're going to go look somewhere else where they can get paid because they want to hit their goals and get on accelerators. It's a tough balance. It's definitely the hardest part of goal setting, I think.
Yeah, nice point.
Yeah. And by the way, I also would say that if you change your goal mid-quarter, I don't see that. I know the theme of this episode is giving up. I don't think it's the same as giving up. I think giving up would be systematically changing.
Why'd you put it in the questions then?
I don't control what people ask.
But you said there's a dozen different questions. Like there wasn't just this one that came up, but people approach us. I mean, I used to think there was only 4 or 5 people, but we were listening to this and they were our grandparents. But no, a lot of people are out there sending in these things. Don't tell me you didn't have other options on the questions.
I think Sean wanted to vex us with question 1 here. There's
exactly. Just pick a difficult one. Summarize War and Peace.
Okay. Well, let's see if the next question's better. Nick, what's the next question up on our queue about giving up?
All right, let's do this. A founder asked us the following. They said, our business has been flat for 2 years, despite all of our efforts to generate growth with new features and marketing. How do you know when it's time to give up? Sean, want to take the lead here?
Okay, yeah. Since I'm getting all this crud, I'm going to step up and answer this one. So first, I think that it's a very personal. Giving up on your business is a very personal question. I know people who have persevered through these sort of flat years for a long time and found growth, and it becomes an inspiring story of persistence. And I know people who have trotted through it for a long time and eventually were left with nothing but a lot of personal financial debt and ruin. And I think that it's hard for anybody to tell you they have the right answer. There's plenty of apocryphal stories of the Airbnb founders and their book of credit cards, and there's plenty of other stories of people where it didn't work out. So I think that nobody can tell you when it's time to give up. I do think sometimes it's easy. If you're running out of money and you don't have enough money to keep going, then you're going to give up because you're running out of money. If you're break even, you're kind of profitable, maybe some quarters and maybe not. It's hard because you kind of can almost keep it going indefinitely. I think the key thing is to think about what kind of business do you want, what success looks like. So if this decision isn't easy, are you okay with flirting with profitability for a long time? Some people are. If you really want to grow fast and win big, that might not happen, especially if you've spent 2 years looking for growth and you haven't found it. I'm going to find it hard to believe you're magically going to flip a switch and grow exponentially out of the gate. So it's probably worth thinking about from your perspective, what's the best use of your time? Do you want to spend the next few years of your life working on this business and you might be in the same place? Or do you want to do something different? I don't know, Ash, what do you think, man? What advice do you give to founders in this position?
So there is no right answer, but there are a lot of strong signals. So if your company is hemorrhaging staff members, that's, a good sign that the company is probably not going that well. And we need to reassess where we are, especially if your co-founders are amongst those people who are leaving or discussing leaving.
And what if it's you that's leaving? Is that a sign?
Well, I think then you're absolving yourself of this question, right? You have already done the giving up piece on this one. So yeah. So if your co-founders are leaving, if you're feeling like you should leave because the opportunity cost is too high to stay, if customers are leaving, if their engagement is falling, if you don't have an opportunity to sell this business to someone else, there's no obvious buyer or interested buyers. And then obviously the last piece is all of those factors are probably going to lead to being out of cash in some way. So as a general rule, as these kinds of things start to decay and crumble, I will often remind founders that they should not be going into personal debt, spending life savings, especially if they have a family, in order to make me happy. I have to go through this explanation quite often of like, look, if you're not going to be 1000x, I don't care if it's a zero. Don't spend your next 2 years trying to get me 1.2x back, right? Or 0.8x back of my investment. And that is where a lot of this kind of behavior comes from. And remember that that's an opportunity cost for the investor as well. They'd much rather you shut down early so they can give you another check for the next one.
That's such a hard thing for founders to really grasp. And I don't know what the solution is here, because obviously from an investor perspective, to your point, 1000x is tremendous. And these, 0, 1x, 2x, that kind of thing, ultimately your hope is that they just go for 1000 or don't. And I don't think founders, especially early stage founders when they're getting started, really get that, nor is there there's not great ways to communicate it either, because you just want them to be so ambitious and go out there and make the magic happen too. It's a challenging spot.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's funny because I have those conversations most often when someone's investor refers this founder to me and says, hey, would you talk to this person? I think they need to stop. Because the investor is sort of removing themselves from the discussion because of that fiduciary element and are asking someone like me to be very direct about what's going to happen. And just to be clear, like every single time now, it's at least 10 or 15 times where I've begged a founder not to put their life savings into trying to save this company for some outcome that an investor doesn't care about. They pretty much always do it anyway, and we're still at a 0% success rate.
And by the way, if you're an investor out there, Ash will provide this service to your companies for a very reasonable fee. Just contact us. Nick and I take a small commission as his agents. We'll set you up. You'll be good to go.
Agents? Agents of what?
We add intangibles, a lot of value. There's value add. There's value added somewhere. It's fine.
Agents of destruction.
Oh, that's good. Oh. Hey, so before we get into the next question, I did have one extra flavor to ask about this. So for startups that are pursuing opportunities on new frontiers, so in the years, you've got crypto, blockchain, Web3, AI, and you've got these new things that have emerged. Often timing is such an important factor that goes into this. Crypto founders for years would have felt as if they were in a bear market to only then have these moments of acceleration. And so is there anything that these founders working on the frontiers of new movements can consider about all this, or does the same playbook apply?
That's, in my opinion, that's partly why it's such a personal decision, is that sometimes you are just waiting for like the market to shift and things to catch fire and light up. And like my first company at Flurry, that absolutely happened. Like the arrival of the iPhone took a business that we were in that was like, okay, but not great and definitely declining, and turned into a rocket ship. I can't tell you that I knew I was waiting for the iPhone to launch, but we felt like there was potential. And if we could last until that market opened up, we didn't think it was an explode. But like at the same time, that event might never come. I think that, there's many markets, VR, the virtual reality market has been waiting for it to blow up for years. And honestly, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, it seems like it's easier to explain after the fact.
And there's definitely people where, there's been founders of companies that have done the business twice. And when they did it the second time, they caught the right trend and it took off. I think we see that over and over again. I believe New Relic is that. They started off on hardware initially. It didn't work out, and then later came back with pretty much the same product, but in the cloud. And then now it's a public company.
Very interesting.
Not like Wiley Technologies, which was Lou Cerny's first company. It wasn't a failure. It was a $200 or $300 million acquisition, but New Relic ended up becoming a multi-billion-dollar company. It was the same business, just one was in the cloud and one was on-prem. And it turns out, you're right, Ashley. You just had to wait for the right part of the market to take off. That's the hard part. A lot of this is that we look back at successes and we don't notice those moments of serendipity or the things that happened. And if we convince ourselves that we're just one lucky break away, you can keep going forever. And I don't know that that's a good situation to be in. The opportunity cost of your time, where you might pursue something else that maybe has a higher chance of catching on, can be a lot higher than the actual financial costs. And you look back and you're like, why did I spend those 5 years when I could have been doing something else? You don't want to have that kind of regret.
Amen.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, let's get to this last question. My co-founder and I have had a rocky relationship since the beginning. We're at a point where I doubt we can work together anymore. what does that mean for the company? I have some thoughts after this.
This is an awkward way to start a discussion about my performance of the podcast, guys.
I think it would say my understudy and I. If it
Oh, goodness. Well, I love the initial framing for this question, too, because this founder is saying that their co-founder and them have had a rocky relationship since the beginning. This has been going for some time. That being said, I still think inevitably you owe it to the company, you owe it to each other, you owe it to the opportunity to do everything in your power to figure it out. There are a lot of ways to consider about this. You want to make sure that you're aligned on expectations for the company, number one. Number two, I think often you just need to introduce new ways to discuss the problem. So if you had a rocky relationship and you're spending all your time in the office together, change your battle arena, go elsewhere, for instance, and just see if you can get a fresh perspective on how you can be able to collaborate.
like the Colosseum via Airbnb.
Yeah, there it is. We got some.
That's actually a real opportunity, folks. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, the reality is you've got these ways you can just break through the routine to see if you can extract yourselves and see eye to eye moving forward. But it's not always possible. Last thing I'll note here before I kick it to Sean is that the question here is, what does it mean for the company? If you've worked with great attorneys and you've established traditional employment agreements and you need to part ways, the good news is that the company should own all the IP by way of that. And so you've got some infrastructure here if there is a proper break. But Sean, with that, I'll turn it to you.
Well, I think it hinges a lot on how long ago the beginning was. If you and your co-founder have had problems, rocky problems since the beginning, and the beginning was a month ago, I mean, you need to figure it out, and expectation setting can help and better communications can help. If the beginning was like 3 or 4 years ago, there's a point in which I find that relationships just become so far gone that you can't recover them because the conflicts no longer are based in whatever they started and they've just metastasized into this just ongoing conflict for the sake of conflict. And it's very unfortunate. You see many companies that are like pre-IPO, late stage businesses where the co-founders just have a toxic relationship. And it's not even clear how it started. It's just metastasized into this thing that keeps them from getting along. In the latter case, I think that you have no choice but to part ways. You can't have a toxic relationship where you're fighting with your co-founder. At the very least, you're distracted. In the worst case, I mean, it's going to spread to your team and it becomes very difficult for the whole team to operate. I've seen very bad cases of that. It's never easy. It doesn't matter how big the company is. Losing a co-founder is traumatic. Try to make it as amicable as possible. To part ways with someone has to go. If somebody won't go amicably, you might have to fire them. That happens, unfortunately, often because at some point the company becomes big enough that the company needs to survive in spite of you, not because of you. And letting go of somebody who's a toxic conflict source becomes a necessity, which is why I think, Nick, you're actually right. Reversing back to like that initial relationship, the best thing you can do is make sure you at least have the foundation to have a cordial, productive, professional relationship. You don't have to be friends with your co-founders forever. You're not going to agree on everything forever. But if you, in the early days, the best you can do is invest in that relationship. So in the later stages, it doesn't become one of these toxic conflict stews. Like, I don't know the worst cases you've seen. I saw one case of 2 founders of a pre-IPO company that literally would not speak to each other anymore. They had to speak through other employees because if they spoke to each other, it would break into a screaming match.
My word.
Even during like all hands meetings, like it can get so bad.
Yeah. I think the caveat I would just add about firing a co-founder, I do think it often comes to that because someone, just refuses to leave or digs their heels in and you have this toxicity as an additional factor, but it's always worth putting in the effort at the point of termination to wrap it up then, because when it comes up next is at the end of your funding round, and that person now, the fired co-founder, has a ton of leverage. So you want to be really, really careful about leaving that. And I see that quite often where someone has had a toxic relationship with their co-founder. It's come to the point where they've fired them. Now they suddenly feel free and they're happy and they're able to work on the business. And so they don't tie up the loose ends around the termination with the co-founder who has a big equity stake, who probably has some kind of board level rights. And that can be a big problem later. So you need to make sure that they've signed away any kind of board approval rights. They've signed away a reasonable chunk of the equity. You can't have somebody at an early stage company who owns more than 10% of the company and is not there day to day. So we have to be looking at their equity stake being sub 10% after the next maybe 20% round dilution comes in. Make sure they've signed a non-disparagement agreement. Make sure that you've tidied up any kind of money that's owed to them. If there was any early money that went in where you guys kind of shared that expense and it was a gift to the company, make sure that's written in writing that it was a gift and not a loan or anything else. All these kinds of things. Now, again, this is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. Please talk to your lawyer. But there's a lot that actually needs to get tidied up, because someone like this in a position of strength when you are at the point of an acquisition or a big funding round, their lawyers are going to be heavily incentivized to find anything. So I'm almost hesitant to give a list because there's just so many small things they could use if you haven't done everything right.
Oh, and you're so right. It's amazing how people come out of the woodwork. The minute you're coming out on some sort of big exit or big moment, people will be like, oh, this is my chance to make some money. And it brings out the worst in everyone. I 1000% agree.
There's a famous case of this. I think Cruise, when it sold with the self-driving car company, I think one of the old co-founders came out of the woodwork at that point.
Or maybe it was one of the AIs that became self-aware. It's really unclear. we're still investing in that situation.
Oh, dear.
Oh, man. I just as a quick wrap-up question for you guys, have you ever had to give up on anything in your careers that you felt like was a really meaningful lesson that we could learn from?
Well, with SendHub, our big mistake was that we launched a voice feature alongside our messaging feature and spent years building that. And then when it didn't work out, we went back to messaging and the business started growing. By then, I was already hemorrhaging team members, had plenty of people that were, critical to our team who were departing or looking to depart, and we weren't really in a position to raise a lot of money. So I felt like, we could have gotten profitable. We could have maybe built the business out a little bit more, and we were able to post-acquisition, but we just had no choice given the situation, and so had to opt to sell, which was very, very tough, honestly, at the time.
I hear that. All my companies, we've had to make major pivots, and it always required me giving up on my initial vision for what the company could be to go after this new vision. And I don't know if everybody's ever pivoted. Like, you can't half pivot. You have to fully pivot. And the hardest part for me was always acknowledging and giving up on what the idea had got me motivated and excited in the first place for this new idea that I was getting excited about and was a better vision. But that feeling of giving up on that initial vision, it was always very hard for me. I don't know that I was as good at it as I should have been.
I'm 100% in the same boat. And I think as part of the optimism of being a founder too, and I think the key thing for founders to really recognize is it's a balance of having massive conviction as well as understanding the reality for what evidence you've got about whether you're on the right track or not. Because I've definitely gone further and longer for an idea than absolutely would have made sense. And in fact, have seen that when either wrapping up that idea, closing up shop, and pursuing something new. And then you can see immediately the results are different, and it would have justified changing direction significantly earlier. And so It's a hard thing to balance, but you got to have conviction and some flexibility at the same time.
Giving up is not easy, but don't worry. We are never going to give any of you up. We're never going to let you down here at the Startup Help Desk. We're here for you. As always, Ash and Nick, thanks for sharing your wisdom and experience around this and many other topics.
Thank you both.
Don't give up, folks. Never let go.
And with that, the Startup Help Desk is closed. We would love to answer your questions in a future episode. Please go to our website, thestartuphelpdesk.com, or Twitter/X at thestartuphd, and let us know. We'd love to answer your question in a future episode. But for now, the Startup Help Desk is closed. Good luck in building your business.